At Maker, we are so proud to present a new feature that is going to take your artwork to the next level. This feature is called Dynamic. Let's dive right in. So what we can do now that wasn't possible before is we can make palettes. On the top of our game, on a simple layer, we just draw swatches, the way we might draw swatches for a character reference sheet. So you can see here, I have a separate palette for lipstick colors, for eye colors, for hair colors, and for clothing. And now I can make as many separate palettes as I like, but I can also reuse these palettes. I can use one palette for the whole game. So how it works is you put a code on your layer. So you write, for example, shirts, and then square bracket, palette, local palette, local dash palette, and then, shirts. You give some name that you will use later to reference this palette. And the reason why we are writing local palette instead of just palette here is to let the program know that this is a palette made in Photoshop, because we will later have the ability to support custom-made palettes right in Maker itself. So there's our palette, and now if we scroll down to an item, so here's a top. And now what's new is we can have multi-layered items. Instead of a color picker, where we used to put a color picker, we now put dynamic. So we put, for example, top 3, and you just want to give your layer a name that you can reference later. So if you get an error saying like, oh, layer top 3 doesn't have the right tag, you're like, oh, I know where that is. That's in the tops folder. But what matters a lot is what's in the square bracket. So we write top 3, dynamic, and then inside we can have different layers. So we have one layer for our outlines, we have one layer for the damask pattern, one layer for the middle color, one layer for the trim, and one layer for the base fabric color. And so what we would do is on every layer that we would like to have color options for, we write, something like fabric, square bracket, palette. Now we just write palette, colon, and then in this case that palette is called dresses. So the name we use here will be used to reference back to a name of one of the palettes above. And I've done the same thing for the trim layer, for the base, and for the damask pattern, because I want all 4 of them to have the full range of colors that this game has. And then the lines do not have any tag, so they will simply be there and not interact. And so what we're going to have here now is this top will have 4 different color options. We are now supporting multi-colors in an item, which is so exciting. Another new thing we're doing is we are supporting blend modes. This is also new. So for example, if we go to this mask, we have our base color, feather color, dots, shadow, and lines. But what's new is these dots, this layer is set to screen. It has a screen blend mode. You see if I switch it back to normal, you can see that these colors are actually dark, especially this line here, it's a dark color. But when you set it to screen, it creates a highlight out of it. And so what happens now is if we take the color underneath and change it, whether we make that item light or dark, that highlight, anything on the screen layer, will lighten it. So this is an excellent option for hair highlights, because if you want the hair highlight to be seen both on the dark colors and the light colors, screen filter is really good for that. We are also supporting multiply. So for multiply, you see if I change this layer to normal, it's actually kind of like it's even hard to see because it's a light beige. But if I switch it to the multiply blend mode, then it now becomes a darkener. So no matter what color we have below, it will darken it. So multiply is great for shadows, because previously if you were doing a shadow with like a transparent black, it will be really harsh on light colors and barely visible on dark colors. But with multiply, you don't get that. With multiply, it creates a much more realistic shadow effect that will be more gentle on light colors and more intense on dark colors. And if you use a warmer shadow, it will create a warm glow. If you use more like a pale blue, it will kind of create a more realistic bluish shadow. So you can have a lot of fun with this feature. So how this works in Maker is when we upload our file, you can see here's our mask. We can change the color, and whether we choose our light or dark color, the screen blend mode will always lighten and the shadow will always darken. And we can switch to palette 2 to switch the color of the feathers separately. And likewise, if we go to the top, we can choose the color. We can click on the palettes to switch to the next item, and if you remember, there were 4 of them. So we can switch the trim, the middle piece, and the damask. I kind of liked it white though. And soon you'll also be able to unlock the full palette. Premium users will be able to go beyond the pre-chosen colors and they'll be able to choose their own colors. A caveat with this is that the colors are chosen, the layer order is chosen in reverse. So generally when people create games, the bottom layer tends to be the sort of base fabric or what have you. And then they tend to, on average, not always, but on average, put the more smaller trim pieces higher up. And so these selections load the layers bottom up. So palette 1 will usually be your bottommost layer because that'll usually be your base most important color, and you tend to, as you flip through, you tend to go to the smaller and smaller details. A caveat of this system that you should know is that where you have the filters, they only work on items within this dynamic range within this item. So for example, if I were to take these dots and draw them outside of the mask area, they will no longer have the same effect because the effect is calculated just within this item. So make sure you keep all your blend mode items within that item. We also support overlay. Overlay is kind of like a mixture of the two. If you draw something with a light color, it'll lighten it. If you draw something with a dark color, it'll darken it. Overlay is great for like a paper texture overlay, but be careful with that because again, you cannot simply stick a paper overlay on the whole game. You have to keep it within a dynamic item. So yeah, that's the feature. I'm super stoked for it. This will make the files so much smaller. This now enables multi-color selection for one item, which is new and super exciting. And we now have blend modes, which will allow you to create warmer, softer, more nuanced and realistic effects on your items. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'm so stoked to see what you guys create.